Yo guys, what's going on? I'm Tim for The Real Sports Talk. You can hit me up on Twitter at CashKelly_TRST. First of all, thanks to Tom from BeforeTheKickoff.com for the logo you're going to see in this video, and also some big news, a big video coming tonight, an interview with an MLB Hall of Famer, and a bunch of other interviews. Justin is at a spring training facility. I'm not going to name which one because that'll narrow down which Hall of Fame pitcher it would be, and that's kind of for you guys to wait and find out. But this team has a lot of stars on it, and he has a press pass, so he can essentially go bother the players for interviews. So we're looking to get a lot of interviews tonight and tomorrow. Over the next couple days, we're taking the next step on all these interviews. This is what's going to put this channel over the top. But today, I'm getting back on the MLB 30 Clubs and 30 Recaps. I know I've gotten off it. For the rest of these next couple weeks, I'm going to try and do these videos straight through. So let's get to the Toronto Blue Jays, a team that I believe was 81-81 last year, finished in 4th place. And honestly, I don't know if a ton has really changed. Let's go through the lineup first. Let's start at catcher J.P. Arencibia, who last season in his rookie year, J.P. Arencibia did a lot of things very nice. Now, average was not necessarily one of those, though. He had .219. But that being said, he did show a lot of power, which he did show throughout his entire minor league career. We saw numerous times where he hit over 25 home runs. And last year in his first full major league season, in 129 games, he hit .219, but he also had 23 home runs and 78 RBIs. I look for him to get his average up to around 240 or 250 this year and improve. He's already one of the best power-hitting catchers in the game, and I see about 27 home runs with about 85 RBIs this year. Bright future ahead for J.P. Arencibia. Jeff Mathis then would be the backup catcher who spent a majority of his whole career with the Angels. What he's done essentially throughout his career is he's been a very mediocre player who has shown some pop in certain years like 2008, but overall he was kind of always second to Mike Napoli, and then last year he was still kind of the backup there. Overall, Jeff Mathis is a nice backup. He will give you some solid innings behind the plate if Arencibia can't go. And we saw he only played 130 games last year, so the backup is important. As a starter, I would not take Jeff Mathis, but as a backup, I think he actually is one of the better backups in the league right now. Over at first base, you have Adam Lind, and we'll get to his backup in a second. But overall, Adam Lind has actually been very underrated over the past 3 seasons. In 2009, he had one of the best overall seasons in the MLB. He had .305 with 35 home runs and 114 RBIs. While the last 2 years, the average has dipped, the power has stayed pretty high. He had 23 home runs in 2010 and 26 in 2011. And in 2011, he got closer to that 2009 season. 2010, he dropped down hitting .237, but 2011, he got back up to .251, and actually, I was very impressed overall. I think Adam Lind is one of the top 10 first basemen in the MLB right now, and probably one of the most underrated players. Edwin Encarnacion, who spent most of his career with the Reds, and then the last 2 seasons, or season and a half, I think, he has spent in Toronto. He will also be the DH, so he will be the backup, and they'll move on and off at first and DH. But for the most part, Edwin Encarnacion will be the DH, and he will also be Brett Lowry's backup at first base. Edwin Encarnacion's career has kind of been a disappointment to me because I thought that he could be like a superstar third baseman right when he came up. But if you really look at what he's done throughout his career, he's actually had a pretty nice career. He's a nice player. He's not going to blow you away. But last year, 272, 17 home runs, you'll take that. It's not... You could do better, and maybe the Blue Jays, if they're really in contention, decide that at the deadline, if we can move him to being on the bench and have him as an option off the bench, or maybe just get a left-handed hitter to come off as the DH when you're facing right-handed hitters. Edwin Encarnacion is a very nice piece to have in that type of circumstance. At second base, you have Kelly Johnson, who was acquired at the trade deadline last year from Arizona. 2 years ago, he had the best season of his career, was an all-star, hit .284 with 26 home runs and 71 RBIs. Last year, though, was not necessarily terrible. The power numbers weren't necessarily too far off. He had 21 home runs. The RBIs dipped to 58. And part of the reason was because he was still hitting home runs, but he wasn't hitting this for the same type of average. He wasn't driving guys in with a single and a double. And the average really showed it because he had 222. His on-base percentage dropped to 304. I would expect somewhere right in between what you got in 2010 and 2011. So like a 260 average with about 25 home runs and 68 RBIs. Somewhere in that is what I would expect out of Kelly Johnson this year. At second base then, you have, or backing him up at second base I should say, you have Mike McCoy. McCoy, not necessarily a terrible backup player. He hasn't been in the league enough to get a great gauge on him. At shortstop, you have Yunel Escobar, another guy, former Brave, just like Kelly Johnson, whose career, it looked like it was destined for better, but he hasn't necessarily been terrible. He's more of a in-the-field guy, but he is a decent leadoff hitter. Last year, hit 289, 7 home runs, or 11 home runs, and 48 RBIs. So Yunel Escobar, he'll get the job done for you. He's not like an elite shortstop, but he's a nice piece to have there. Luis Valbuena will back him up, and he will also, Luis Valbuena, let me get to him. He's going to be third string at second base, and he's competing for an MLB job. Backing up Yunel Escobar at short, you have actually two very good options. You have Mike McCoy. Last season, McCoy did only hit 198 with 2 home runs, but I actually see Mike McCoy having a surprise season this year and being one of those guys. I mean, bench guys, they're not like these great players their whole career. They just come out of nowhere. And I think Mike McCoy, with having Omar Vizquel behind him, and I'll get to him in a second, and having maybe getting even a chance when Kelly Johnson needs a day off or Yunel Escobar needs a day off, I think Mike McCoy will have a nice year this year. Omar Vizquel, the third string shortstop, and he has said essentially this is going to be his final year. He's never really been the best hitter in the MLB, but this is probably, him and Ozzie Smith are probably the two best fielding shortstops of all time. So Omar Vizquel brings, for the most part, he's just going to bring leadership to this team, and maybe he'll get some occasional playing time. But I don't see a ton of playing time for him, though, because I think that they would much rather have a younger guy like McCoy. I mean, McCoy's 29, but Omar Vizquel is 42. So Brett Lowry at third base, one of the most underrated young players in the game. I think he is destined to have a huge year this year. Last year, in 43 games, hit 293 with 9 home runs and 25 RBIs. That's in 43 games. Multiply that by 2, you're still only at 88 games. You're talking 18 home runs. And you multiply that to the point where you get to about 160, and you're talking almost 30 home runs. I think about 24 home runs for this guy this year, on average around 295. I think he will quickly become one of the top 5 third basemen in the MLB. And the great thing for the Blue Jays is he's only 22 years old. I mean, he is going to be a superstar, I think, in this league. And speaking of superstars, look out to right field, which is the position Jose Bautista plays. He has certainly become one of the biggest players in the game. 2 years ago, 260, 54 home runs, 124 RBIs. People said that there was no way he could top that. In my opinion, he did top that last year. He had a better overall on-base percentage last year at 447. Had an average that shot through the roof. He hit 302. The RBIs went down, but that's because the home runs went down to 43. But I would much rather have a guy hit 302 with 43 home runs and hit 260 with 54, because that means that he's also driving some runs. And he stole about 10 bases, so he's a threat, and he struck out a few less times. Right now, this guy's one of the best overall players in the game. He hasn't necessarily found a position because he can play third base as well, but a nice piece overall to have. Eric Thames will back him up in right field. Last year in 95 games, hit 262 with 12 home runs. So you have a really nice fourth outfielder in Thames. Well, my bad. Thames will be the starter in left field. So let me get to Thames. Thames actually showed quite a bit last year. He's about 26 years old. 262, 12 home runs, and 37 RBIs. That's only in 95 games. So I think that if he plays a full season this year, you're talking about a guy who's going to hit about 259 with 17 or 18 home runs, and that's a pretty nice outfield overall, because when you look at center, you have one of the most underrated young players in the game, Colby Rasmus. Spent most of his career with the Cardinals, did not get along with Tony La Russa, which seemed to be a common theme with a lot of people. But overall, last year, within his time in 2010, let me get to that. 276 with 23 home runs and 66 RBIs. Things did not work out last year, and it was just a bad season for him. But I see him as one of the breakout players in the MLB this year. I think that he could hit about, I want to say about 26 home runs and bat 275. He's a really nice outfielder to have on that team. And this is a team that actually has quite a bit of depth out there in the outfield. Let me go through some of the depth. They have Travis Snider, who a few years ago a lot of people thought was destined for a very bright career. And it's not that he so couldn't do that. It's kind of he's been blocked in the outfield because there's 3 other outfielders that are producing better than him now. But he actually, last season, 225, 3 home runs, and 30 RBIs. He's going to be a nice bat off the bench. In 2010, he hit 14 home runs, hit 255. With the emergence of Jose Bautista, they didn't necessarily need him anymore. So that's kind of why he didn't become an everyday starter. You have Rajai Davis, probably the fastest guy in the MLB right now. Him, Alfredo Mezaga, Jose Reyes, those type of guys. Rajai Davis is going to steal you a ton of bases if he gets the time. Ricky Henderson said when this guy was with the A's, he thinks that he could steal 80 bases. He's a really, really fast guy. He hasn't necessarily found it as a base stealer because of overall playing time, but Rajai Davis is a nice player. Ben Francisco, a guy they acquired from the Phillies, I think is unlikely to make the MLB club. He'll give you some decent at-bats off the bench. He's a nice fielder, but I would take Rajai Davis over him because Rajai Davis is going to give you the extra stolen bases, and Ben Francisco doesn't bring more than what you could get out of a guy like Travis Snider. Now, as good as that lineup does sound, the problem for them is their starting rotation. Ricky Romero, who they locked up, which was very smart, is a very good young pitcher. 15-11 with a 2.92 ERA. If you really think about the numbers, he threw 225 innings last year, had a lower ERA than guys like CC Sabathia and James Shields in that own division, who are considered some of the best pitchers. He is an elite pitcher in this game right now if he could pitch anywhere close to that level. Now, the Jays cannot continue to pitch him 225 innings in the regular season alone because eventually there's going to become a point where the Jays are going to make the playoffs. I don't know if it's going to be this year or whenever. The Jays are going to make the playoffs, and when you throw 225 innings in the regular season, your arm tends to wear down. And we saw it with Roy Halladay. Roy Halladay was able to do that because he's unhuman. But most guys, they're not going to be able to throw 225 innings in the regular season and then go on to the playoffs and be as successful. Roy Halladay obviously did that with the Phillies, not the Blue Jays. Brandon Morrow is a number 2 starter. He almost threw a no-hitter the other year. But other than that, not necessarily a good start. Last year, 11-11 with a 4.72 ERA. He had a couple nice years with Seattle where he looked like he could be a bright player. But I think overall, he would be best served being in the bullpen. I think that is his niche, and they're trying to make him something he's not. He has had some really nice games, but overall, he's had a pretty big sample size, and the numbers don't add up to just having a few nice games because he's had a lot more not very good games. Brett Cecil is going to be the number 3 starter. Another guy who's really going to have to step it up. He's young. Last year, 4-11 with a 4.73 ERA. I mean, he's going to have to do better than that because 2010, 15-7 with a 4.22 ERA. I think you'll take that out of him because long-term, he's not going to be your number 3 starter. Now, a 4.22 ERA is not good enough for a number 3 starter, but I think as the Blue Jays are able to become closer to a contender, you'll see him drop down in that rotation. As a 5th starter, that's not necessarily terrible. At the number 4 position, you have Henderson Alvarez. Last year, 1-3 with a 3.53 ERA. Looked pretty nice. A 3.53 ERA. If he can get an ERA under 4 as your number 4 starter, that is going to be very good. And I think that this is a guy that long-term will be in this rotation. Probably their long-term number 3 or 4 starter. And then Dustin McGowan, a guy who's never really found in the MLB. Last year had a terrible season in 5 games. 6.43 ERA. And everyone will say, oh, that's only 5 games. He's had an ERA over 4 pretty much his entire career. Every season he's been in the MLB. Some years he had 6.35, 7.24, 4.08, 2007. Looked better. But then 2009 came back up to 4.37. Overall, Dustin McGowan is not a very good pitcher. I'll put it that way. And as we look to their bullpen, now this is one of the best bullpens overall in the MLB. Sergio Santos last year with the White Sox was 30-36 in saves with a 3.55 ERA. Not necessarily great, but he's worked on improving some of his pitches this offseason. And I think that he is one of the, if you're a fantasy player and you're in a deeper league, Sergio Santos is going to be one of the guys you're going to want to pick up because I think he is a sleeper to have a really nice year this year. If things don't work out with him, though, they do have a backup option in Francisco Cordero, who has been a closer for a very long time last year, still getting it done with a 2.45 ERA. 37 of 43 is not good, and that's kind of was his problem with the Reds, is he got so many opportunities every year, and he just blew too many. If you blow more than like 4 or 5 saves, it's a bad season. In the last 2 years, he blew like a combined 14 saves. Last 3 years, he blew a combined like 16 saves. That's just not good enough. As a setup man, I think that he could be very good, and it's going to help Sergio Santos, who is the young closer, to have guys like Francisco Cordero, Darren Oliver, a veteran who always seems to be in a pennant race. Last year, Darren Oliver continues to get it done, over 40 years old. He went 5-5 with the Rangers with a 2.29 ERA, and was one pitch away, was one Nelson Cruz dive away from getting his first World Series ring. Ultimately, that did not happen. He's a guy that I think, if the Blue Jays aren't in contention, will get traded because he holds a big value. He's an elite left-handed pitcher, and there's not too many lefty specialists just out there right now. Jason Frazier is the other guy. They're getting him back. Last year, 3-3 with a 3.60 ERA, another really solid piece. So overall, with the Blue Jays, as they go back to their old logo this season, I see about between 79 and 82 wins this season is right where I'm going to put them. 4th place, they'd be a lot better in most divisions, but the pitching staff is not good enough. And in this division, if you can't pitch, you are going to get shelled because the Rays offense is going to get way better. You got guys like Desmond Jennings progressing. You have Carlos Pena coming back. With the Red Sox, you got probably the second best hitter in the game, Adrian Gonzalez, Dustin Pedroia, former MVP, Jacoby Ellsbury. Carl Crawford had a bad year last year. And then the Yankees, Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, both of them had down years, and they're not going to be as bad as they were last year. No way that happens. Curtis Granderson had an MVP-type season last year. Mark Teixeira had a down year for what we're used to seeing out of him. I mean, I know the power was still there. That's the problem with the Blue Jays, and they've always kind of been that team that said, if we can get a second wild card, we'll be in the playoffs every year. And then the last few years, the Rays have really emerged as an elite team, and now it kind of looks like they're stuck because Andrew Friedman, I think, is the best GM in baseball, and he's just done a tremendous job stockpiling talent for the Rays. I'm not trying to make it look negative. This is a team that, if a guy like Kyle Drabek can ever progress into what they thought he was going to be, he was the big piece in the Roy Halladay trade, that could really help this team. But overall, they're just not going to have the pitching depth, and they're probably one more bad away from contending in this division.